Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again, I'm Martin Ballard. A very warm welcome to episode 100 of Imagine Theatre's podcast series. And this time we have a special all-star celebration of Panto for this landmark episode.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
Now, in the last episode, we explored the new Imagine Theatre headquarters and talked about the big move to a premises which is 4 times the size of the last building. If you missed it, you can still check it out along with all of the other previous episodes. As I'm sure you know by now, in the last 99 episodes, we've discussed all things Panto with performers and creatives, producers and backstage team members. With over 50 hours of audio and more than 120 guests, we've explored the various Panto titles and vital elements that make the shows what they are. We've given you an insight into how pantomime is produced, as well as discussing its history and future. It's an expanding resource for anybody interested in the genre, and hopefully fun and entertaining too. So remember, you can check them out where you normally get your podcasts from, and don't forget to subscribe to the series so that you don't miss any future episodes. Now, first of all, I can't believe we've reached 100 episodes, if I'm honest. Thank you so much for your support so far, and to the incredible Imagine team who helped to make this possible. To mark this, we wanted to do something a little different, and as I've had the pleasure of interviewing so many stars of Panto over the years, I thought it might be a nice way to celebrate both the podcast and Panto in general if we heard some of their memories, some of their anecdotes and stories, as well as from some of the Imagine team. It's a fascinating insight into the recent history of Panto, how it works, and how it's changed. So you'll hear how a young Morecambe and Wise enjoyed Panto from early in their careers, how a legendary dame gave Dora Bryan her big break, how Bob Monkhouse was inspired by going to see Panto as a child, and hear from the man who did more than most to celebrate pantomime, as well as a Coronation Street star who appeared in Panto as a young comedian and took a live animal on stage with him. Plus a host of legends and household names. But I wanted to start with the Panto legend, Roy Hudd. He was a comedian, actor, presenter, radio host, author and authority on the history of both music hall and pantomime. So who better is there to describe the genre than a man who championed it for decades?
That's why I love pantomime so much. That's why I do like it, because it is that sort of entertainment. You're right. The edges are always blurred in pantomime, if you know what I mean. The rest of the time, people always pigeonhole people. They say, well, he's a stand-up comic, you know, he's a singer, he's a soap star, he's something else. But when you get into a pantomime, it's always been this glorious sort of rag bag of lots of different talents being brought together and hopefully successfully brought together. That's why I love pantomime. It's interesting that so many people have always said to me about pantomime, they said, well, of course I do different gags at night, you know, to when all the kids are in. They said, don't you? I said, no, never, because it's the one time of the year when you get the whole family together, and there is no need for rude jokes in pantomime. There's absolutely no need, because all ages will laugh at certain things, and I always use as a yardstick when I put a pantomime together. Now, would Laurel and Hardy have done this? And if I say, no, they wouldn't, then it's cut. Because, let's face it, I mean, you know, grannies and granddads and 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds all like Laurel and Hardy. It's good, classic comedy, and that's what pantomime should be, I think.
Another legend of 5 decades of pantomime is Danny LaRue. He appeared in more than 45 pantos from the 50s right up to 2005, and the first was Cinderella in Gloucester, playing Ugly Sister with Alan Haynes, a partnership which lasted 14 years. Danny would always talk to me about the magic of pantomime, and here he also talks about what the season means for the actors and how they can spend Christmas.
You go in and you think you've got all the dads sitting there and they've had a terrible day before, they've supped a few pints or whatever, and the turkey, and I think, oh, we've got to take the kids to the pantomime, I wish we hadn't booked the tickets. And then the curtain goes up, and after 5 minutes, they've even forgotten the children, they're booing and hissing and cheering. You can't define the magic of pantomime. That brings out the children in everyone, you know, the child in everyone that's longing to go back, get off, it's behind you and all those things. I think it's magic, I really do. I think it's wonderful. These days you have all sorts of people doing pantomime now that years ago you would have laughed I thought, now what would we do with Maggie? She hasn't been working for a while, so I've got Wonder Maggie in the pantomime. But of course it brings the house down.
Panto keeps you in this country at Christmas, but what about Christmas? What did Christmas mean to you? What sort of plans do you have?
Well, I was going to say we can't plan anything because we have to have a very quiet day. Usually a few of the gang, we're together because you must remember we're all away from our own homes. And you can't go home because it's just one day, because you know you've got 2 shows a day for quite a while. And pantomime is quite exhausting. You've seen the weight of some of my costumes. I mean, you're dead. People say, I suppose you go out after the show. I said, I've collapsed. You know, when you're off. See, when I'm off, I'm changing into all those outrageous clothes. You see, a pantomime costume for the dame has to be very visual because some of the tiny tots, they just think, who's that very tall woman up there, you know. You're very aware that you don't overdo the makeup. I look like a big walkie-talkie doll because if you have all lines and funny noses, it frightens tiny tots, all that paint. I mean, Michael Elfrick, who's marvellous, he gets so worried backstage. He thinks, oh, did you hear that child cry? He said, I don't like frightening children. I mean, you couldn't find a nicer man. But I think he plays Ebenezer with tongue-in-cheek, and I tease him a lot. Twanky is a very modern lady. She is a goer. You know, she fights for her family, and I think it's probably the best dame role.
It's
probably
the ultimate pantomime dame, really, isn't it?
So.
The whole show revolves around Twanky.
I think Twanky, yes. I mean, the 2 pantomimes are naturally Cinderella and Aladdin. I prefer Aladdin and Cinderella, you know. But it is, for all professional artists, a quiet day. I always go to midnight mass, which I like. It's a wonderful feeling, a midnight mass. All the people, there's a joy, which of course is a time of joy, isn't it? I like Christmas.
Next is one of a few interviews given to me by the late comedy writer, producer and playwright Mike Craig. He gave me the use of some of his interviews before he died, and they included the Southport-born actress Dora Bryan. She went on to appear in everything from Much Binding in the Marsh and Hancock's Half Hour on radio to countless West End comedies, musicals, television shows and films. But her career began as a child in the juvenile chorus in Manchester, thanks to the Dame and Panto legend Norman Evans.
We used to do charity concerts in the garden suburb in Oldham. Norman Evans, you know, over the garden wall. Well, he was doing that in this little pavilion in the garden suburb. And I was carrying on as usual, singing something about a soldier. There's something about a soldier, you know, all that. This is what Mum used to tell me anyway. But it was Norman Evans said, you must put that little girl on the stage. She's got such a lot of personality, I suppose, I don't know. So my mum sent me to Eileen MacNeil's school in Oldham. Eileen said to my mum, why don't you take her down to Manchester to Eileen Rogan's school? Now, Miss Rogan was married to a man called Mr. Gordon, Mr. Frank Gordon, who was Gertrude Lawrence's first husband. So I'm cutting a long story short, actually, because I used to queue. Mr. Jones, my headmaster at Hathershaw Council School, was ever so nice. He used to let me leave early to go down to Manchester. And I remember having a terrible row outside the Queen's Hotel in Manchester, which isn't there anymore. There were cobble streets, and there was a man beating a horse that was pulling a big heavy load, and I was tap dancing in the bus queue, you know, and carrying on again. And I saw this man beating this horse, and I had to stand up round. I couldn't have been more than about 11, 12 or whatever. I used to travel all the way to Wythenshawe on my own. At the Eileen Rogan dancing school, they used to go and look for children for pantomime, and I was chosen as one of the 24 Eileen Rogan babes, you see. Yes. And so that was my first professional engagement, Jack and the Beanstalk at the Palace Theatre, Manchester. It was really due to Norman Evans that I went on the stage. Oh, I'll tell you another funny thing that we used to do at the Palace, Manchester. We used to do this high kick routine with xylophones strapped onto our backs to the Poet and Peasant Overture, high kicks. Oh, and our backs used to be so sore because the xylophones used to bang on your spine, you know. What happened was, see, there was 24 children, right? Mm-hmm. And each had xylophones strapped on their backs. Yes. And we used to play on the
girl in front of you?
Yes, on the girl in front of you. Then we'd turn round and do high kicks, but the xylophones were still strapped on, and they used to hurt. And then we go rompy-dumpy-diddly-dum, rompy-dumpy-dum-pum, rompy-dumpy-diddly-dum, dumpty-dum-pum. And the audience thought, what clever children, I expect. And you know, the Palace Theatre, Manchester, we weren't allowed to use the lift. There may not have been a lift, I don't know. We used to run down the stairs, the babes, and I remember once I was running down on my own, and there was a rat on the stairs. Now, the following year, I did the Hippodrome in London, which is now talk of the town, and this time, in that pantomime, there was Alicia Markova, Anton Dolin, Freddie Carpenter, Max Wall, Florence Desmond, Chili Buccia, Billy Danvers, and the babes in the panto had to put on a party for the principals. And, oh yes, then the following year was Harry Gordon of the Inversnecky Club, the Alhambra, Glasgow.
Dora mentioned the great Max Wall, who took a different route to start his pantomime and showbiz career. He was a successful actor and comedian whose career covered music hall, films, television and theatre. But that career began as a child when he ran away from home to work with another legendary dame.
People say to me, when did you start? But I started at the age of 14, you know. And I ran away from home as my parents had a pub in Braintree in Essex at the time. And there was a little tatty cinema there, you know, and the fellow called Ellis Slack used to bring these tatty little shows round. Eventually, when the time came, I ran off. I ran away from home and joined him, and I played Jack in Mother Goose. And, of course, Mother Goose was George Lacey, who was then about 20. And I think he paid me £5 a week. Well, it wasn't long, of course, before Harry, my stepfather, found out that I'd gone and traced me, came down to see me, went in front without me knowing, because he was a pro himself, you know, in the old days, and left me to it. And he came round and says, "You're all right, kid." He used to always call me kid. "Stay as you are." He says, "When the show's finished, come back. And you'll be all right, you're well taken care of." And that was the start of my career.
The actor and comedian Bill Maynard also had an incredible career, which took him from stand-up comedy and radio to carry-on films and major TV success, with shows like Oh No, It's Selwyn Froggatt, The Gaffer, Heartbeat and The Royal. He also loved Panto, but he was insistent on maintaining the traditions.
I wander on and I do the opening and the giveaway and read the parties out, you know. Then I do the ghost gag, which I do very simply, I do very basically, because I think that people try to find new ways of doing things, whereas if you do the old gags the correct way, there's only one way to do them. I mean, to me, the ghost gag is 3 people sitting on a bench in the forest, and behind them appears somebody in a white sheet. Now, I have argued about, that's another thing I've argued about, people bring on skeletons and big animals, and it's not the same. All you need is a man in a white sheet. That is the ghost gag. And if you do it right, ever since it came in, I have used Ghostbusters as the song we sing. They all know it. It's very, very simple. I mean, it's wonderful. And I have this thing about kids joining in. I mean, my forte is in pantomime is not necessarily being funny. My forte is getting the kids shouting, getting them screaming from me. Even when I used to walk on, they all scream magic. I used to put 2 thumbs up, and they just shout magic. Yeah. And I love pantomime.
It is a tradition in this country that should never be allowed to die out, and all the gags and the things that you mentioned are still passed on generation to generation. If I said to you, righto, righto, you would say,
"You're standing on me, righto," of course.
Absolutely. And they're passed on still, even today.
Of course, and if they're done correctly, they're still funny. Because you see, in pantomime, you've got to, usually, you're playing each year to an entirely different audience. And not only that, people expect the old gags. It's like doing a medley of popular jokes. I mean, when the scenery went wrong, it used to be hysterical because we used to do things about it. You get yourself out of it, and that's part of the fun of a live performance.
Of course, many of the traditions have remained, but as pantomime has evolved, others have disappeared. Back in episode 46, I had the pleasure of chatting to another Panto legend, the late and much missed Nigel Ellacott. He appeared in pantos every year from 1974, firstly as an ugly sister with Peter Robbins, and latterly as a dame until he passed away last year. His knowledge and skills extended well beyond performance. He designed and created his own costumes, and a selection are now in a collection at the Victoria and Albert Museum. His website, itsbehindyou.com, became a comprehensive account of everything Panto, with archive records, a diary of upcoming shows and much more. And when it comes to Panto traditions, Nigel told me that some had simply had their day, but he was pleased that others had survived and were as popular as ever.
Yeah, some of those gags have gone for the best, I think. A little bit of heaven fell. Does anybody out there know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah? Sandbag?
But there are so many of those, aren't there? So many of those routines.
Oh, Tree of Truth.
I was going to mention the Tree of Truth, yes.
Tree of Truth, which a poor ASM at every single show had to take all these rubber balls and stick them back on a tree again. It took the whole of the between shows to put them up. I'll tell you what was revived. Michael Harrison has revived an old routine that I remember seeing originally with Jack Tripp, where you tell a lie and your clothes are whipped off. It's a lovely gag. Gags that everybody's doing at the moment. They're all doing If I Were Not in Pantomime, and also, of course, 12 Days of Christmas. It started off life as Automation, it was called, but I remember seeing it in its current format at the City Variety Leeds. Very early 70s. These routines are passed on word of mouth, basically, by one generation to another. But now we don't have variety. Routines and shaners, as we call them, are not being done. Summer season's not what it was. There's really no new gags appearing and nobody to pass them on.
Back in 2018, I had the pleasure of working with an actress who's done everything from Carry On Films and Benidorm to Russ Abbott's Madhouse, Loose Women, and a range of soaps from Coronation Street to Emmerdale. Sherry Hewson was playing the Wicked Queen in Snow White, and she told me she loved playing baddies and has fond memories of her very first panto.
The first one was with Russ Abbott in Southampton. Now that's going back to 1918 probably. I worked with Russ for 12 years and I think he taught me about comedy and timing, and I used to stand and watch him, and he's so clever. And I think I got a lot of my timing from him. And I always remember that pantomime because I can't sing, but they assumed I could. So they got me to sing the first opening because I played Jack's friend, and I had to sing some dreadful pop song of the day. And I was so bad that all I heard was the dancers falling over themselves at the back of me and an audience staring at me like it was a horror film and not a clap. And actually, when I left RADA, because it's a classical drama school, I wasn't ever expected to go into comedy. It just fell that way. I did In Loving Memory with Thora Hird, and from there on in, it fell that way. But I was one of the only actresses at the time that crossed from comedy to drama. That wasn't allowed in my day. You were a comedy actress or you were a serious actress, and I did both. And so that's why I've been very lucky all my life and always worked, thank God.
With Panto, obviously there's a baddie. That happens to be you. It's going to be difficult for the audience because everybody loves you, and yet they've got to hate you in this, haven't they?
Well, my baddie, I always say I'm Paul O'Grady in a dress. So my baddie is always quite camp. Although I am horrible to the children because they have to boo me. So when I come down at the end for the curtain call, they're not quite sure whether to boo or clap. But I love baddies. I don't like playing, lovely people because it's not fun, really. But being baddie, especially in a pantomime, because it's tongue-in-cheek. You can be evil in a camp, outrageous kind of way, and I've always played baddies like that. So I really enjoy it.
Another star of Coronation Street was Bill Waddington, who played Percy Sugden in the 1980s and 90s. Over the years, Bill played several different characters in the soap, but he also had a career as a comedian before that, enjoying a lot of success, including Royal Variety shows with legendary names like Frankie Lane and Dorothy Lamour. His agent was Lou Grade, and in his very first pantomime, he met the actress Lillian Day, who became his first wife. You may not know as well that he briefly had a stage double act with the legendary Sid James. But in Panto, he also formed what I can only describe as an unlikely double act with a live animal.
In pantomime, we always had to look for ideas to entertain children. Now, I had at this time a pig farm. No, what I did, I used to take a pig on the stage with me in pantomime, and in fact, I've still got the licence allowing me to do this. Walk on the stage with a pig. And I did it at Hume Hippodrome, and I did it at Liverpool Pavilion, which no longer exists. But I used to bring this little pig on, and people were fascinated by this little animal coming on to me, jumping into my arms and fed it with a milk bottle, talk to it and just give it a bit of a squeeze and it would answer back. Because you squeeze a pig, it'll grunt, you see, so it worked very, very well. They thought I was a vent, somebody. And two fellas had a bet in Liverpool that it was one said it was a mechanical pig. And they asked permission to come in and actually see the pig and see me do what I used to do on the stage with the pig. The show was called The Old Woman That Lived in the Shoe, and my wife was principal boy and I was principal comic, and we were in number 2. The reason being that number 1 was a very small room anyway, so it was the pig had number 1 dressing room.
Of course, many pantos feature animal characters, from the cow in Jack and the Beanstalk to the cat in Dick Whittington. I've appeared in Aladdin when we had a camel, and Hansel and Gretel where the 3 bears made an appearance. Some of these can be puppet characters, but there's also been a tradition of so-called skin characters, performers in animal costumes. The writer and comedy producer Mike Craig and I talked about one man who made a career out of playing a cat.
People specialised in playing cats. You know,
Dick Whittington.
Dick Whittington. Yeah. And there were 1 or 2 really brilliant cats. One of them is a member of the Grand Order of Water Rats still, and he's called Jerry Lee, Gerryle. And Jerry Lee was renowned to be the best pantomime cat. Do you know what he did? He's not like the cats you see now who are obviously in a cat skin. This man looked like a cat. Yeah. He was beautifully made up, his face was made up, whiskers and all that. And one of his specialities was he would go in the audience and he'd go up into the circle and he'd walk on the rail of the circle if it was wide enough, you know, the velvet coloured, where people might put the programmes, you know, or their box of chocolates that get knocked over into the stalls. And he would walk on there. Now, can you imagine that? That is amazing, isn't it? Pantomime cats extraordinaire was Jerry Lee, and there were 1 or 2 like that. Quite amazing. Today you just get someone who's small who can go meow.
The Nuneaton-born comedian Larry Grayson loved pantomime and appeared in many. In fact, Christmas was a very special time for him, with blockbuster TV shows, Christmas specials like Shut That Door and The Generation Game. In fact, you could say that his whole career began as a child at Christmas.
If I start back from when I was in the nativity play at school when I was 4, and I was one of the shepherds, you know, in a sack, and I saw these 3 kids in glitter. And I said, who are they? They said, they're the wise men. So I said, well, why can't I be one of the wise men and put that glitter on? They wouldn't wear it, would they? See, even then I knew what it was about. The princess, not the princess, that was Snow White, what's the fairy? She spoke like that, you know. And she sang like Jessie Matthews. And she would go, you know, that type. And I kept saying to her, very good you are, dear, you know. I thought she'll get nowhere. And then there was, never heard of her since. A lot of people I work with, you never hear of them. They just vanish. I don't know. Marty, you keep laughing all the time.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Larry Grayson many times, and I don't think I got through any of them without collapsing into fits of laughter. Another funny man was Bob Monkhouse, who had an incredible career as a comedian, writer, actor and TV and game show presenter. He wrote for many panto legends like Arthur Askey and Max Miller. In fact, his first acting role was as Aladdin in a Cole Porter musical version of the Panto tale. Bob made his pantomime debut as Buttons in Cinderella at the Palace Theatre in Manchester back in 1958. But he'd been a fan of the genre from a very early age, thanks to his granddad.
My fondest memory of childhood was not just going to the News Theatre on the off chance of seeing Laurel and Hardy or a silly symphony. It was not just the fact that I could go to our local flea pit, the King's Hall down in Penge, and see Ernie Lossinger in a film. It was one Christmas, just one Christmas. I suppose I was 7. I had the world's best granddad. He was my father's father. He was round, he was ruby-cheeked, he was benevolent. He had white eyebrows and his eyes were bright blue and they twinkled. He looked like Santa Claus, except he didn't have a beard. He was completely bald, and his head shone as if it had been polished. And he had half-crowns in every pocket. And that Christmas we went to his home. He'd invented custard, you know, Monk and Glass custard. Monkhouse and Glasscock was the name of the company, and that was my granddad. And so he was quite wealthy. And we went to his lovely home, which was called Terrington in Dulwich, and we spent 2 days there. He had a wonderful set of upstairs, downstairs types. All the servants, as they were lovely people. There was a butler, and there was a boots, and there was a lovely cook, just like Mrs. Bridges, and the steam coming out, and the great goose being carried out onto the table. Everywhere there were crackers and decorations, and me clambering all over Grandad. And on Boxing Day afternoon, he took us to see the Panto, and we went to the Lyceum, and it was the first time I'd ever seen Clarkson Rose. And he came out onto the stage as Widow Twankey, and I laughed so much. I was sick in the interval, and I didn't care, and my granddad didn't care, and he bought me more to eat, and we had more ice cream, and we had more to drink, and we had these great big boxes of chocolates he kept producing from bottomless pockets, and laughing at me laughing, and everybody had such a marvellous time. And I can remember going to bed that night on that great soft linen that they had in those days, whatever happened to that, and real down pillows, thinking this is the best time of my entire life. And that marvellous golden Christmas has remained a wonderful memory, a warm glow within me ever since, despite, in 1954, my meeting with the very man who was really responsible for the wonder of it, the great Clarkson Rose. He was appearing in Belfast, at the Opera House there, and I was on the same bill. And I said to him, Clarky, I must tell you, the very first pantomime I ever saw was, I think, 1935, at the Lyceum, on a Boxing Day afternoon. And I wondered if you remembered doing it. And he said, yes, I remember that. Oh, I remember that show. I remember that theatre. What a terrible experience. What a horrible day. Oh, really dreadful. I had a filthy cold. The manager was impossible, you know, absolutely impossible. None of the props worked. The audience was dreadful, noisy, those kids. And I thought to myself, he saw me, and I never let on. I never told him. But as the years have gone by, I realised how he must have felt, because it's happened to me. And it does make you think, it is a funny business.
It is a funny business indeed. Now, Imagine's artistic director Eric Potts has appeared in many of the biggest pantomimes in the UK, as well as some of the most popular soaps and dramas on television, from Brookside in Coronation Street to Peak Practice and Doctor Who. But like Bob Monkhouse, his love of theatre in general, and pantomime in particular, began as a small boy in Scotland.
We used to go from primary school, go to our nearest kind of big town, which was Ayr, and we go to what I didn't find out until later years was actually an amateur panto at the converted church, which became the Civic Theatre. And I loved it, but I had two great fears as a child of that age. I hated the tipping seats because I was convinced I would fall through them. It's not an issue these days. And I hated fire. I was terrified of fire. And of course, one year they did an illusion with the metal pan, and they opened it and there was a flame there, and it absolutely terrified me. So that was my first experience of panto, which I did enjoy despite my concerns. As I got older, we used to make annual trips to both the Gaiety Theatre in Ayr, which is a wonderful little venue still there, and the King's in Glasgow, which was iconic panto with Stanley Baxter, Ricky Fulton, Una McLean, all these wonderful names of Scottish variety. So yeah, I had a strong upbringing of visiting panto.
Now, we often talk these days about triple threat performers, don't we? Roy Castle was multi-talented. He was a dancer, singer, comedian, actor, television presenter and musician. In addition to being an accomplished jazz trumpet player, he could also play many other instruments. He later became best known to British television viewers as the long-running presenter of the children's series Record Breakers. But he was also inspired by going to see a panto as a child and going up to take part in the song sheet.
You go to a pantomime, you see, with your mum and dad, and they don't watch the pantomime, they watch you, don't they? They say, if he's enjoying it, we're enjoying it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why they bring you. And so we got to the bit where you have to go up and sing normally. There was Wally Wood, you see. His name was Wally Wood. I would love to meet this fella. If he was still alive, I'd love to meet him again, because it was a magic experience for me. because he was calling up for kids to come up, you see, and the idea was to have boys against girls. So there were 3 girls went up, and there was no boys. He said, we'd like a boy to come up. Any boys? Come along, boys. Now, where are you? What's the matter with you? You see? And so my mum and dad said, do you want to go up? Go on, go on, go up, go on, go on, go on. You see? Really, he can't stop it when your dad's really got his foot in your back, can you? Anyway, off I went, you see, and I went up under the stage, and suddenly it's a new world. And so it came to my turn, and I was on my Todd, and I sang it in my little tenor voice. I didn't have a soprano. Does a lamppost get bronchitis in the winter? Standing on the corner of the street. Yeah, we could get that back again, I'm sure. Don't tell anybody about that. I'll bring it back. And the comedian, Wally Wood, instead of sort of saying, very good boy, that was very nice indeed, he didn't do that. His face went all sort of straight, and he went to the front and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I've been very surprised by this. If the parents of this boy are in the audience, I suggest that you send him for some proper tuition, because he's got it. He's got it.
Well, there's no doubt that Roy Castle certainly had got it, whatever it was, and he proved it for many, many years. But in 1958, he appeared in the Royal Variety Show and the Royal Command Performance, and that's where he met his lifelong friend Harry Seacombe. Now, Harry had an incredible career of his own, of course, from The Goon Show to musicals like Smike and Oliver, countless hit albums and singles, as well as movies and TV shows like Stars on Sunday and Highway. He said whenever he did Panto, though, he always enjoyed it so much it was a joy to go to work each day.
I was fortunate enough to be, along with Stan Stennett perhaps, in pantomime with the lads. And it was hysterical. I mean, I used to look forward to going to work. Pantomime, you know, it's the smell of wet niggers and oranges, isn't it? You know, it's and the terrible noise coming over the tannoy. It's not something that a weak man goes into. Pantomime is something you have to gird your loins for. That audience lurking out there in the darkness waiting to savage you. But I used to enjoy going to work because there was always something different, even though, you know, he'd do the same thing night after night. He'd put something in, you know, to throw me. And in that pantomime, one letter came from some disgruntled punter up front saying that the standard of comedy was pretty low, you see. And the bloke who ran the theatre stuck this notice up on the notice board backstage. So we thought, that's not good enough, you know, said Eric to me. And I said, you're all right, Eric. So we concocted a letter between us saying how marvellous the comedy was and how brilliant these 3 comedians were, Seacombe and Morecambe and Wise. And I got my dresser to write it out in longhand and posted it from outside town. And I remember the fella came backstage, the bloke who owned, I wouldn't mention his name, the bloke who owned the theatre came backstage and looked at us. He said, I've got this letter, looking at me and Eric. And he goes, oh yes, you know, looking instantly. And he was forced to stick it up on the board alongside the other one.
Like so many others, Imagine's joint CEOs, Sarah and Steve Bowden, have loved pantomime since their own childhoods.
So I've always loved theatre. I've always been a theatre fan. I've always been taken to the theatre by my parents. My mum and dad had 2 very, very special friends who we got to know as Auntie Sally and Uncle Paul. Uncle Paul was the musical director for Bernard Delfont right through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So we had a real insight into the backstage world of theatre with Uncle Paul. We used to travel the country watching him direct musical theatre, work on pantomimes, and I did that right from a tiny age. We always went to the Coventry Theatre pantomime, which ultimately became the Belgrade Theatre pantomime. And in fact, my birthday is in the middle of August. But for I think it was my 8th birthday, my mum tells me that I didn't want a birthday party in August. I wanted to take all my friends to the pantomime. So pantomime's always been a really big part of my life, even though I never, ever dreamt as a child that it would become my career. It never entered my head that my love of pantomime could become what I did for a living, and that's where I think I'm really blessed, because it's a real love of ours, Steve and my real love, but it's become the thing that we do all day, every day, so we're really lucky.
And in terms of theatre, did you have aspirations to be a performer at any stage?
Oh no, never a performer, amateur only. I love a bit of amateur theatre, you know, in my early 20s. That's how Steve and I met. We met after theatre doing a production of Nonsense. He was directing, I was playing one of the nuns. I've done multiple other musical theatre. I've played Maria in Sound of Music, Sally Smith in Me and My Girl, lots and lots of other things. Had the pleasure of playing a part in Annie in a local production alongside my own daughter playing Annie, but never on stage, always backstage, and my love of watching.
Steve has been directing their shows since the company began, and he has one of my favourite It'll Be Alright on the Night stories, because as we all know, there can be times when things don't go to plan.
We've had a number of moments in our careers, I think everybody has, where you kind of go, goodness, we're in a bit of a pickle here. I think one of my early memories of that was at the first pantomime we did at Loughborough Town Hall, which was an Aladdin, which you were playing Widow Twankey in. And I remember it was late one night and we were doing a technical rehearsal. That's the rehearsal where obviously we spend the time making sure that all the physical elements of the production, like the scenery and the costumes and the lighting and sound and stage management, are all able to work through their sequences. And we went to set the laundry, and we had a cloth that we were using that said Twankorama. It was the internal workings of Widow Twankey's laundry. And for those of you who work in pantomime, most pantomime sets are framed by what we call portals that frame the set. And Loughborough Town Hall doesn't have as big a stage as the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry, so the portals that we were using had been brought in. But unfortunately, and Kevin Cutts, the technical manager, I remember him rushing into the auditorium when we flew the set in. He was laughing and slightly concerned, and it was late at night and we'd had a heavy day. And he said, "We've got a problem." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" He said, "Well, look at the cloth." And rather than seeing Twankorama, the T at the start and the A at the end were masked. And I won't say what you saw, but most people who are listening will probably be able to work it out. And it was one of those great rehearsals where you actually just stopped. We all had a jolly good laugh. And we said, right, let's pick this up in the morning, and that was the end of the call.
Now, as we know, many legendary performers cut their teeth in pantomime. Morecambe and Wise began their panto careers in the 1950s in shows like Sinbad with George Lacey as the Dame. That was at the Alexandra Theatre in Birmingham. Eric had fond memories of those early shows, including a season at the Dewsbury Empire.
Pantomime, we'd never really played pantomimes. And one of the pantomimes we played was Dewsbury Empire, which is now a income tax office. Had Ernie have known in those days, he wouldn't have played it. He'd have gone white. It was Richard Stevenson, a man called Richard Stevenson, if I remember rightly.
Correct.
And his pantomime. And there was Harry Shields, Joe Black, Reg Bolton was the producer, and the Melomaniacs, a comedy singing group. And tiny dressing rooms. And we were in with Arthur Sumner of the Melomaniacs. And he was a big, tall fella. And Reg, you see, was a very, very generous person with his material. He was very kind to us because we didn't have anything. He gave us a lot of very good pantomime stuff that we used for many, many years afterwards and extemporized on until we basically made it our own. But there's a rather funny story with that particular pantomime, because Joe Black, who was the star.
Simple Simon, I believe.
He was Simple Simon, yes. And he used to have this little Yorkshire Terrier with him. He used to run on the stage, and that was the biggest laugh anybody could. You can't top dogs, you know. Even Joe couldn't top him. This little dog, a little Yorkshire Terrier, used to run on and just run round the stage to rounds of applause, you know. I often thought of dressing Ernie up. But Joe, Ernie, and I, and Barbara, Joe's wife, became very friendly. And he had this bus, converted bus, that he lived in. And it was a beautiful thing inside. It was a caravan, but it was a bus, an old bus. There's no other word for it. It was a bus. And Ernie had only just learned to drive. And I couldn't drive because, you know, I'm the slow one. We bought it off Joe. We thought, that's it, Ernie and I. That is it for touring. We've got it made. And I think we had it a year.
Of course, celebrities continue to be attracted to pantomime, and in recent years Imagine Theatre have introduced several famous names to the genre, thanks to associate producer and head of celebrity casting Laura Taylor.
I have just had the best experiences and worked with the best people. I mean, there are so many, and it sounds like I'm bragging. I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but I just feel so lucky to have worked with people like Barbara Windsor, Cilla Black, Bradley Walsh, David Hasselhoff, Pamela Anderson, Henry Winkler, Priscilla Presley. I mean, Dame Edna, you know, the list goes on. And to think that I worked with them all, some people that other people won't be that impressed by, really, but because they meant a lot to me in my childhood. People like Cannon and Ball. I was such a Bobby Ball fan. When I worked with Cannon and Ball, it was like a dream come true. And Torval and Dean, you know, I got to work with them, and I remember just absolutely adoring them when, you know, I was 5 or 6. I am so lucky, and there's been, you know, I've ended up in places where I've had to sort of just have a reality check and think, how the hell did little Laura Taylor from Enfield end up here? But I have, and I'm very grateful and thankful for all the experience I've had.
In recent years, I've interviewed television and radio presenters Vernon Kay and Scott Mills before and after their pantomime debuts in Imagine shows. In episode 50, I caught up with Vernon at the UK Pantomime Awards to find out how his first ever season in High Wycombe had gone.
Oh, it was amazing. It was everything I expected it to be and more. I think the initial nerves of the first night quickly dissipated when you realise that people are actually smiling. And I think that was my kind of most nerve-wracking thought was, is this a good show? And everyone's saying, yeah, it's a brilliant show, but when you're so involved in it and when you're submerged in it, you kind of start to question yourself. But it was fantastic, and Imagine did a great job in the set and casting it as well, because the cast, they held my hand, they guided me through it all. I took lots of tips, lots of advice from everyone, and yeah, it worked. I loved it.
Never mind the judges. What about the judges in the family? What did the kids think?
Oh, my daughter came more than 10 times.
Really?
I think she came there about a dozen times, and then every time she came, she brought more school friends and more college friends, and they were all whooping and hollering, and everyone loves a shout-out, and I did that all the time. I mean, Mum and Dad came down twice, which was lovely.
In fact, Vernon had such a great time that he recommended pantomime to one of his colleagues at BBC Radio 2. Again, I spoke to Scott Mills before he appeared in Imagine Theatre's Jack and the Beanstalk in Leicester, but in episode 69, once the show had been running for a while, I went back to see how he'd found the experience.
I was about to say like a kid at Christmas, but it is Christmas, but I do feel that. Everyone keeps saying, oh, you'll get the bug now, you'll want to do it again. I totally get it. I think as well that I've really kind of relaxed into the show now. I think the first couple, because I missed, I'm not making excuses, sir, but I did miss quite a lot of rehearsal time because I was doing the radio show. And it's my first one, so I think it's crucial. So I was very nervous the first few shows. But I feel, well, you can tell me, you're the expert. You've seen it again since the first show. You've seen it twice, right? Yeah. And I think I feel I have relaxed into it now. And I'm just having fun with it.
I was really surprised at the first show, if I'm honest, because you looked really comfortable. Whatever was going on inside wasn't showing.
No, it was chaos in my head.
But second time around, the audience were in your palm of your hand. You were loving it.
Yeah, and do you know, and you'll know this, when it's like we've just finished a show now and they were great, and it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was even full, but they were just, you know, when there's, and I get it now, some are louder than others. Yep. For instance, on Boxing Day, I was expecting them to be, I don't know why, expecting them to be really loud and excited, and they were actually quite subdued. And it does really change from show to show. And then the school shows are different again. Yeah. And then the relaxed show tomorrow, which will be different again. So I feel like I've done an exam and I've crammed everything. But I am in such a great production, I think. I would say this, I'm biased because I love them all, but I really do think it's a good one.
As I'm sure you know, Scott was bitten by the bug and was back in Panto for Imagine in Swansea last Christmas. And that brings us up to the present day. I hope you've enjoyed hearing stories, anecdotes and Panto experiences from celebrities, Panto legends and some of the Imagine team. Thank you once again for your support for the first 100 episodes of this podcast series, but that's it for now. Don't forget to subscribe through your favourite podcast app and spread the word to anybody you know who loves pantomime. Next time, I'll be chatting to the actor who's done everything from Harry Potter movies and Shakespeare to the West End smash Choir of Man, and of course, Panto. So join me, Martin Ballard, next time for episode 101 in conversation with Ben Goff.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.